radio. And of course, you can tweet me. It is at Oliver_speaking on Twitter, Oliver Dixon on Facebook. If you want to give us a call, that number is 086 000 2032. 086 000 2032. I'm going to repeat that WhatsApp number for you, 0614 104 107. But here's an important rule about it. Make sure that it's under a minute and make sure that we can hear you. Turn down the radio, record the WhatsApp voice note, and send it. Don't send a WhatsApp voice note where we can hear ourselves in the background and now we're distracted by that. Lisero's just absolutely not going to play those WhatsApp voice notes. You know how strict Lisero is about that. So to introduce you to our debaters today, on the proposing side, the proposition side of the debate, from Rhodes University, Elethu Dela, who is a second-year pharmacy student at Rhodes University, and James Okuku, who is a third-year LLB student at Rhodes. And on the opposing side, we have Nelson Mandela University, Sino Mutase, who is a second-year LLB student, as well as Anita Mgaleli, who is a fourth-year LLB student. So a lot of lawyers in the room today. That's going to make for an interesting debate for very obvious reasons. And of course, this debate is happening live, and I'd love to hear your comments on that. We're going to be starting with the first speaker on the proposing side, followed by the first speaker on the opposing side, and so forth, and so forth, and so forth. At some point, if time is on our side, we might hear from our live studio audience here today. Can I ask everybody to put a big round of applause together as we hear from Elethu Dela, who is the first speaker on the proposing side. Thank you.
Sorry, I just need to time myself. Sharp. Okay. Starting in 3, 2, 1. So panel, in this debate, both sides of the House recognize the importance that social media, search engines, and applications in general have within society. We think it's not mutually exclusive to say that these forms of media rather are things that connect people, they're things that inform people, and they're things that educate people. What we're going to show you on our side is how you get the very same benefits that you get in status quo, but you get them at a better level, right? 4 things I'm going to do in this debate. 1, I'm going to give you context as to where this debate exists, why it needs to happen. Secondly, I'm going to characterize to you status quo as in what the foreign equivalents of these social media apps look like within status quo, how they come about, and all of that. And then thirdly, I'm going to show you the specific harms that come with foreign equivalents of internet apps and internet's like search engines and applications in general, and for how we're better off for countries that aren't within those homogenies. Right. So onto the first thing, right? So we think it's already assumed in this debate that this is not going to be a debate about access to information. We think that even though Safari and Chrome are 2 different apps, they still have the same information. We think this is the suit that these apps would follow, right? This means that if there's an Uhuru Wikipedia app equivalent for South Africa, that app would still have the same information and wouldn't lack anything when it comes to getting information from elsewhere, right? Why is this important? This is important because having an app that is like having a local app or like a locally made app isn't the equivalent of saying that only material from that specific place will be published, right? But here's why this is going to become important later on. Secondly then, status quo, what does this look like? We think we have these multi-country and we have these like big MNCs, which are companies like Facebook, Amazon, X, etc., right? What is unique about them and what is specifically important? 1, the amounts of funding that they get. 1, in order to have a company run at that level, there's a significant amount of funding that you need to have. Secondly, then, this means that information is centralized, right? Because Facebook originates from the United States, and the information that's going to come is going to come with connotations from the United States. That means that they tell you what to say, what to do, right? And then secondly, then, we think there are very like specific standards that are within social media and within these engines in general, right? This is why Hollywood exists as a concept. It exists because of the propagation that the material that's published there through their media, which has many people, is like the best, right? We're better off on our side when you have these local platforms that promote very local information, because this means that this information can be tailored to the South African or whichever country's context that it exists in, right? So what are we saying in this debate? We're saying that firstly, the government bans things when there's an intrinsic harm to them, or there's an intrinsic benefit that you're going to get at the end, right? What is the soft harm in this debate? The soft harm is that there are specific values encroached in these specific apps which like propagate like different things, right? This is to say that for you to be famous on Facebook, number one, as a media outlet, you need to have a lot of money so that you can buy ad space, right? Number two, this means that for the company that like wants to run a startup, you can't necessarily do that because of the funding that isn't there, right? The importance here is that on our side, you allow for more startups to like emanate within society, and you allow for more central information to the countries that come in, right? This means that at the point at which SAfm, for example, runs on a platform that's strictly South African, it's easier for like advertisers to buy ad space on that specific platform than it is on Facebook, because Facebook is much larger and Facebook is economically more difficult to access, right? Why is this important? This is important because, number one, it combats the westernization of media that already exists. How? When information is tailored specifically for a specific community, then the westernization that happens when you want to view material that comes from Hollywood or anything like that, or the glorification thereof, is something that becomes absolved. Because at the point where you're like, hey, here's the media that we're pushing to our people, here's what our version of TikTok has to offer, then you ensure that you get like some form of tailored information. Before I continue, is there a POI? No. Away. Second thing I'm going to talk about then is like the interests of these foreign equivalents of these apps, right? We think they're largely profit driven. We think that they're secondly like they don't care about these states that don't fall under like their funders or like whoever like their beneficiaries come from, i.e. the Facebook not caring about like people from outside the US because they make up like a minority in terms of like the funding, the shares that they own within Facebook and things like that. This means that there's a specific streamline of information that happens when you have Facebook being located in one specific country. But here's why it really exists on both sides. So it's not really like something that's harmful on our side, because it also exists within status quo, right? Whatever I told you in this debate, one, I've framed to you what these foreign equivalents look like, what they do, and how they operate. Number two, I've shown you why countries with smaller revenue and like countries that aren't really in those spaces are like put aside in terms of the content that's created, and how westernization then harms like the reality of the media that you would otherwise get, or the information that you'd otherwise get. And for those reasons, I urge you to side with side proposition.
Thank you very much there to Dela, who is on the proposition side. We're going to take a very short break, and on the other side of that, we will bring you more of this debate. And in the meantime, we urge you, send us your voice notes, your comments, and your questions on 0614 104 107. That is our WhatsApp line, 0614 104 107. Vusani Marule, who is heading up the digital program for this, nearly wants to kill me because I forgot to tell you that you can stream this live on our WhatsApp, on our Facebook platform, ironically, as well as our Twitter and YouTube platforms. So do go on to SAfm Radio on all those platforms, and you can actually watch the debate live. That is the beauty of this program. And of course, we will be able to take some of your questions and your comments on our social media platforms as well. We continue the debate on the other side of this very short break.
Here, there, and everywhere. SAfm 105.9 FM in Port Elizabeth.
This week, today, Fridays, 6 to 7 p.m.
Clap at 6. Welcome back to the program. You're listening to This Week Today. My name is Oliver Dixon. Thank you so much for your time and your engagement here on. We bring you a live debate between Rhodes University as well as Nelson Mandela University. And before the break, we heard from the first speaker on the proposing side of this debate, Eletu Dela, who spoke on behalf of Rhodes University. We will now hear from the first speaker from the opposing side, Sino Mutase.
The problem that we get with Eletu's speech is that he doesn't necessarily contextualize why those benefits that he provides for us are ones that are exclusive to his world, right? Are ones that are exclusive to a world where we don't have homogenies, right? And the bigger problem with this context is that he doesn't properly contextualize what a world where we have both local content or like local search engines look like, and a world where we have bigger content and bigger search engines look like. And we're going to dive into that within our debate, right? But before we even get to that recontextualization, let's start with what we get from Eletu, right? So Eletu first tells us that like the harms that exist are, there's a specific value within these companies, right? So the only way that these companies can kind of exist is in a sense where they have capital, where they have enough funds to kind of start themselves up, and where they have enough funds to bring themselves up from the ground and mobilize, right? We think that this is problematic when they try to push a world where there's only going to be local content, because we tell you that you're not going to inspire the kind of competition that you want, right? We think that you're only going to inspire a kind of oligopoly where you're going to be having the first person who is able to get there to establish some form of dominance within those content areas, right? And we think that the kind of competition that they're striving for is not one that is going to be successful, right? Let's take clear examples when it looks to foreign internet-owned platforms, right? We see the main competitors being things like Google, things like Safari, things like Internet Explorer, right? We tell you that that is not a competition. We tell you that that is an oligopoly. We tell you that the circulation of money, they tell you that the circulation of growth only exists within those three areas. And we don't think that that has like a better, like a benefit to the people on the ground, because we think that then it's just tailored to whatever personal preference that they have. We don't get that intrinsic value in a world where it's specifically blocked, or in a world where we're only focusing on local content. But on top of that, we think that then when you're trying to tell us that this is going to have not taken, you think that trying to tell us that the kind of content is going to like boost the economy, or is going to like essentially make it a lot easier for other companies to exist or to have like more ad space. We think that this is also untrue, because essentially those companies are going to reach that same level of fame within these local contexts, which is going to establish more difficulty when it comes to creating or attaining this ad space, right? We're just telling you that you're going to be shifting the difficulty of acquiring ad space, shifting the difficulty of acquiring, I'll take you in a moment, shifting the ability of like getting that kind of ad space or timing into a different context, right? In the context of local governments, or in the context of like local countries, right? Before I get into the clash in terms of like westernization of context, I'll take your POI.
Western media consistently controls the narrative within these countries and often diminishes their narratives within such countries. What happens then?
All right. I'll tie that in with the clash in terms of Western media, right? The main problem that we have with this Western media argument is that proposition or government over-exaggerates the power that Western media has from a standpoint of like search engines, social media platforms, or messaging, right? We tell you that westernization or the influence of Western media extends beyond that. We tell you that it extends within our own just like general media consumption. So when we're looking at apps like Netflix, when we're looking at the kind of television that we consume, when we're looking at all these kinds of stereotypes that we choose to consume, they exist within our literature. They exist within the books that we read. They exist within like the kind of TV shows that we watch, right? So we think that Western influence extends far beyond what they're trying to sell us, right? But above that, we tell you that the westernization is still going to exist within this world, and at most, the intrinsic harm that they're going to be causing themselves is that they're isolating themselves from the rest of the world when it comes to like the kind of access of information, right? And I'll tie that in terms of my positive matter, where I basically explain to you how we still are going to have isolation of information, and how that kind of information is actually important within today's debate. And on top of that, I'm going to explain how we generate a level of apathy when it comes to international concerns and the detriment that that has on like countries and citizens within those countries, but on top of that, on a global scale, right? So moving on to my first argumentation in terms of like countries do not exist within isolation, right? What we need to take into consideration is that these platforms allow for a greater connection to these other countries, right? And we think that this connection best exists when we have these apps being international, when we have these apps being accessible to all countries, right? We tell you that this kind of connection is important because not only is the state supposed to be the ones to have this kind of connection or relation with foreign states or with foreign countries, but we tell you that these affairs are necessary for people on the ground so that they can connect themselves to these foreign states, to these foreign ideas, right? On top of that, we tell you that these foreign ideas push boundaries, right? We tell you that the kind of westernization that we're so fearful of, not taken, tell you that the kind of westernization that we're so fearful of is also ones that is pushing progressive ideas that South Africa, for example, is one that is not willing to move on to, or is one that is not willing to like take the first step into, right? So we tell you that that kind of information and that kind of access is important so that we do push the boundaries of what our status quo actually looks like. On top of that, when we're tailoring our media, when we're tailoring the kind of media that we consume to the media that is only within our country or that is like prioritizing our own country, we generate a level of international apathy. The way that this looks like is firstly, when it comes to social media content, we're less likely to see incidences of international affairs or crises of international affairs because we're being tailored to see our own content of our own country more than content of international problems, right? We think that this is important that we see this because we as the people on the ground actually have an impact when it comes to what our legislature and what our state can do to make a difference within those countries, to make a difference in terms of those kinds of changes, right? And we think that that doesn't exist on the propositions team, and even if it does, it exists on a comparatively far more harmful scale, right? So what have I told you within this debate? One, I've shown you that the benefits that Aletu seems to provide either A, don't actually exist within their world, or B, are not mutually exclusive and can exist on both of our worlds. But on top of that, I show you how you generate a harm on their side that is intrinsic to them and it creates a worse problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the first speaker on the opposition side, that was Sino Mutase. Just to remind you of the topic, this is what the debate is. In instances where a locally created and owned internet application equivalent like search engines, messaging apps, and social media platforms exists, should the state block the foreign-owned equivalents such as Facebook, Google, WhatsApp, X, etc.? That is the debate. Simply put, if we have a South African equivalent of Facebook, should the South African government ban the use of Facebook so that we can only use the South African created and owned equivalent? And what you've heard so far is from the first speaker on the proposing side from Rhodes University, Ele Tutela, and you just heard from the first speaker on the opposition side, Sino Mutase. We now welcome onto the floor, onto the podium, the second speaker on the opposition side, on the proposing side, my apologies, from Rhodes University, James Okuku.
Sir in chair, I find it extremely harmful and extremely ignorant from side opposition to come and claim that because we're going to remove TikTok, we'll not have relations with the USA. Because we're going to remove Facebook, we'll not have relations with the USA. I think the logic they use is counterintuitive. Because understand, I think even at the point at which you're able to remove Facebook, you're able to remove YouTube and Instagram, you still have peacekeeping missions between countries. You still have peacekeeping missions between countries. You still have countries still getting involved in charters, getting involved in conversations where politicians in South Africa go all the way to Russia to come, and have sort of like country engagements between the two. You still have the ability to take part in Olympics and countries taking part with each other. That is to say, it means that what this rebuttal means that their idea on how you don't have partnership, it doesn't actually feasibly exist because, but secondly, I think their argument on partnership often correlates that the fact that politics and like media correlate together. If that is true, it then means that simultaneously the argument Eletu gives you specifically on politicization is true, because understand, the US government uses their specific associations and the media companies which belong in their countries to often indoctrinate their specific policies in different countries. This means that specifically when they come and tell you that there is no dominance, when they come and tell you that, oh, we're going to have like this Western media argument is wrong, it's false. 4 mechanisms why Western media will often have control. One, they often have money to indoctrinate individuals and often take what they want. But secondly, the optics around Western media is that they are more stronger than us. So often you have a leaning towards the optics of their media. But secondly, the political influence that is highly within companies like Facebook and Instagram on the social media often entail that you often want to buy into it. That is why when the USA is having the election, all of us want to tune into it. But when South Africa is having an election, no one really cares, because they have an influence on the type of media that we actually have in those specific instances. This takes down their argument. I've taken down the argument on isolation, Western media, and the idea on dominance. So, why is that exclusivity specifically in our specific side? I think 2 things here. I think the first, that you often have the ideas often generating from natural individuals within the country. Why is this unique? Understand, when you have big conglomerate companies like Facebook and tiny companies that are SMEs within South Africa, because Western media and things like Facebook control media, you often have tiny SMEs trying to catch on to the trend. They become performative, and instead of making original African content, they try to string to the Western media because they want to get sales. This is harmful because, one, you hamper the existence and the originality of African ideas. This is why when an animation from Nigeria comes out, no one really cares about it. But when they're going to make Moana into a movie or something like that, everyone cares about it, because we don't have the capability to promote our own local incentives. That's the exclusive impact on our side. On their side, they wash away local companies which often try to present nationalistic or African incentives in that specific instance. And that is bad. Why? Because if everyone jumps on the Western media, there's no one preaching Ubuntu, there's no one preaching natural African specific ideologies, because all of you are best in the West. What does this do to the debate? I think, one, it proves to the exclusivity to our impacts. Our impacts are tailored at ensuring that we nurture African ideas. Why is this, and why should you weigh this importantly before I process to like ask a POI or something like that? Understand, I think this debate is very intricate to African countries, and African countries often want to develop themselves. If that is true, it means you need to weigh up the argument which best incentivizes or takes care or produces the largest impact of African countries and African benefits in that nature. Africa also wants to have power. At the point at which you deny them power, even in social media, that's when you become extremely oppressive. But note, even the colonial aspect of African countries entails that they're trying to supersede that. Because understand, we are often dominated in politics, in social media, and in everywhere. The ability for Africans to take up social media and the ability for governments to block that presents a huge benefit in those instances. Now to get to our positive matter. So understand, I think there are 2 things here. I think the first one is on how you're able to develop, how you're able to encourage local development. 3 mechanisms here. The first one is that you often reduce competition, because understand, companies like Facebook have more money to push out expansion. SMEs don't usually have that power. At the point at which you ban those other companies, you create a small market where no one has a big money, meaning that you incentivize more ventures within that company, and because they are SMEs, they create jobs. Their argument is going to be, hey, when you take them away, employment opportunities go away. No, they don't go away. The employers or the programmers who are within Facebook now have the capability to create their own local incentives and startups in those instances. The second mechanism here is that you ensure that you tailor media to local needs and local desires. And I think the importance here and the impact here is very intuitive. I think, one, you're able to promote African ideas in many of these instances, but I think, second, you're able to increase venture. What's our case? Our case is twofold. The first part of our case is about the impacts and the benefit that you have when you ban this. What happens when you ban? You're able to open up the market and ensure that there's less competition because these other SMEs can have the capability to grow. But also, secondly, you produce the originality within African countries. The harm, that's the first part of the impact. The harm in our case is talking about the harm when you continuously enable these companies exist. The harm is one, you decrease originality because the SMEs which come up often want to dive on the trend. They want to be performative because they also want to make views, they want to make money. That is to say, it becomes extremely harmful. But the second harmful impact you get that you exacerbate neocolonialism. Why is this true? Big Western countries often rely on the companies that have their headquarters to often influence. This is why when the USA sanctions you, Citibank, which is which works with like Standard Bank, are going to have you on the cap because you can't separate the two. Vote for side prop.
Thank you very much to James Okuku, who is the second speaker on the proposing side from Rhodes University. Just to remind you what the topic is, in instances where a locally owned and created internet application equivalent exists, like search engines, messaging, and social media platforms, should the state block the foreign-owned equivalents, such as Facebook, Google, WhatsApp, X, etc.? We're taking your comments as you're listening to this program right now. You can send us a WhatsApp voice note on 0614-104-107. I'll repeat that slowly, 0614-104-107. Please make sure that your WhatsApp voice notes are under a minute and that we can hear you audibly and clear. You can also give us a call at 086 000 2032, 086 000 2032. We now welcome onto the podium the second speaker from the opposing side, from Nelson Mandela University, Anita Mgaleli.
Within today's debate, we find a very problematic side proposition that is coming up here and telling us that, firstly, we need to protect our culture as these African countries, and because with having these international equivalents, people are not focusing on their local content, and it's just washing away their culture, etc. Right? And we find that very problematic, right? Because we are not, and they tell us that we're saying that we should these foreign equivalents should still exist and everything, and that even if they remove them, we're still going to have all the relations and everything that we're saying that might not happen, right? But we're not saying that, right? We're not saying that these relations are not going to exist just because you guys have blocked Facebook, etc., right? But we're telling you that these platforms like Facebook, your TikTok and everything, right, they are very important and they are very impactful within today's society, and they carry so much weight within today's society, right? And that those relations that you speak of, exist in those same platforms, right? And these platforms aid those very relations within today's society, where we see that these international, foreign equivalent international platforms carry so much weight, right? They tell us about these startup companies not developing profit, etc., because of having such great competitors such as your Facebook and everything that is so well developed and international, right? And we tell you that the profit incentive is still going to exist either way, right? Because we then encourage those companies, by still having the foreign equivalents existing, right, to side with the best monetary side, right? We tell you that by having these for the coexistence of the foreign equivalents and the local owned equivalents, right, it breeds a ground for more competition, right, and it allows those companies to strive to be better, right, because they see the competition, which is your big international companies, right? And they tell us that within local development, the first thing that you do is, I'll take you in a moment, you reduce your competition and everything, right? But then once again, we say having these foreign equivalents in existence actually breeds a ground for more competition, right? Which is what we want to see, right? Even with our local social media platforms, right? And we tell you that it's not fair for you to say that by having these foreign equivalents, we're washing away our African content, etc., right? Because we tell you that within these very much platforms, like your TikToks and everything, the African content still exists, right? It's still out there, and people still follow the African content. So how is then having TikTok and everything washing away those African, the African content? I'll take you.
TikTok and those other apps are washing away African content in the way that they tell you what is African. They make the movies for you.
I tell you that is actually not true, right? Because we tell you that by having your local people, like your Africans, putting the content out there, right? They are the ones that are controlling the narrative, right? Within those platforms, right? They have a voice within those platforms, right? We tell you that even with those people putting on the African content, right? We get people from the US getting onto the trends that the very same African people have created, right? So how are they then controlling the narrative of or controlling or telling you what is African if they are still participating in those very same challenges that are created by the African people, right? Now, in today's debate, I will tell you about how we, as opposition, will be telling you about how we see that blocking these foreign equivalents is actually serving the state more than the people, and therefore the state, in that sense, is not going to be fulfilling its mandate of putting its citizens before anything. And we tell you that by blocking these foreign equivalents, you still are actually limiting the information and the knowledge that people get by tailoring the information that you're getting, because it still is tailored information if you're going to be removing the platforms in which all these things exist, right, and creating a local one, right, which is what you're going to be spoon-feeding your citizens, right, into this tailored information, right, and we find that very problematic as side opposition, right, and we tell you that as a society or as side opposition, we support an innovative society, and we support a society that is able to express itself freely and openly, right, with having freely accessible information, right, and by you blocking the foreign equivalents, we tell you that you are tailoring the information and you're spoon-feeding the people what you want them to see, right, and we need to ask ourselves the question, right, of blocking the foreign equivalents. Who does it serve, the state or the people, right? What does a world or a society where these foreign equivalents are blocked look like, right? Now we tell you that it's the state's equivalents in many instances, right, they block the equivalents that they see as threats to them, or having had created a space or movement that is representative of being a threat to them, right? We then ask ourselves if then in that way has the state fulfilled its the mandate of protecting its citizens and putting them first, right? We then once again tell you that the state fears a digital world, right, where the equivalents have created the equivalents have created within citizens in being in being a powerful tool and being expressive and exercising their rights, right, and especially if it's going to inconvenience the very state itself, right, in as much as they say they're a democratic state such as in South Africa, or in a state, you know, that wants aware citizens, right, and we tell you that it's suppressing the freedom that the citizens have in expressing themselves, right, and it's in no way fulfilling the mandate that it have, right, and we tell you that in supporting these foreign equivalents, we support economic growth, we support development, right, because having this competition means that as it breeds a ground for development within the economy, right? And that is what the state should want to support, right? And we tell you that is a society that we support, right? As side opposition, right? An innovative society, and a society that breeds a ground for competition for the local people to thrive and the international people within that, right? And we tell you that as side opposition, we stand with having an innovative society. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was the second speaker on the opposition side, Anita Mgaleli. We're going to have a listen at some of your WhatsApp voice notes, and please do send them through on 0614-104-107. And after that, we will hear from the teams giving us their closing speeches, or their reply speeches, if you will, starting, of course, with side opposition first, and then side proposition getting to close off the debate. Let's have a listen at some of your WhatsApp voice notes that has come through on our WhatsApp line.
Good evening, Oliver. This is Sammy. The problem with Eluchi's argument is that he doesn't understand how technology works. Social media platforms and search engines, they provide you search results based on what you've searched for. They've got recommendation engines that will recommend content to you. With social media platforms, for example, if you are interested in aerospace, you're interested in anything scientific or technological, they'll recommend things according to what you've searched for. Same with search engines. So it doesn't matter whether it's from China, it's from Russia, or it's from an African country. That's how it works. It doesn't impose Western content on you. That's just the reality of it. So this whole argument of hegemony and so on, no, that's completely wrong. That's uninformed.
Oliver, good evening. It's Johnny Mahala from Gqeberha. I just have to say that the two speakers thus far, from Rhodes first and from NMU second, they don't structure their thoughts properly. There's a lot of nerves, and both of them kept on saying right at the end of every second sentence. That's a terrible, crippling mistake to make. It just shows insecurity and inability to construct the argument properly. So they have to go back to square one and really establish themselves in terms of argument properly. But thanks for what you're doing. It's a wonderful thing. Bye-bye.
Perhaps not responding to the substance is an equal insecurity. But we'll hear from the teams giving us their closing speeches. And of course, you can still send us some of your WhatsApp voice notes on 0614-104-107. Closing up the side opposition case, we welcome back the reply speaker. My goodness, the reply speaker from side opposition, and that is Sino Mutase.
Panel, we tell you that side proposition had two jobs within today's debate. Firstly, they had to explain to us why state censorship should be justified, right? Secondly, they had to tell us why the benefits that we kind of get from their world are exclusive to their world and don't exist within our world, right? So let's start with state censorship, right? They tried to tell us that state censorship is important because firstly, the kind of like hegemony that exists within the status quo is one that is extremely problematic, right? But they fail to kind of characterize what the status quo actually looks like, what the world where having both these foreign-owned states and locally owned states properly look like. But on top of that, they fail to tell us how this hegemony doesn't transition within these small-owned states, right? What you get from an opposition side is that opposition tells you that you're not ending the hegemony, you're just shifting where the hegemony is going to start. So we tell you that these SMEs are going to become the new target for this kind of like profit incentive propaganda problem that we kind of experience within like the status quo, right? Essentially where they're trying to tell us that, oh no, you're actually going to be having Western people trying to tell you how the world should work, where you're going to be having now corrupt Africans telling you how the world should work, which we don't think is a better reality, right? So we think that on that clash of justification, we win because we show you that you don't actually create a better society for that regard. You don't actually benefit none of the SMEs nor the people on the ground, because the people on the ground are the ones who are interacting with these kinds of apps, are the ones who are going to experience the most amount of like impact when it comes to having to shift to these new platforms or having to like kind of change to a different form of propaganda, right? So we tell you that harm still exists and they haven't been able to sufficiently solve it, right? On top of that, they try to then explain to us how they create this kind of benefits, sorry. So these new benefits that exist within their world is economic growth and like how you construct a new competition that exists within these SMEs. On top of that, you have like more cultural benefits that exist because you maintain the culture within these countries and you breed and develop more diversity, right? Problems with this, as we pointed out, is that one, you're not actually providing an economic growth. You're not developing these like SMEs anymore because we tell you that the way that it is going to operate is that the first person who gets there, the first person who can establish dominance within that market and within that industry is going to be the one that captures the most amount of followers, the most amount of people on the ground. That then limits the number of these social media platforms that can actually exist within the status quo, and we didn't get a good response to this argument, right? On top of that, we tell you that then you're not actually creating any kind of benefit to this because we then tell you that the kind of information that these people are going to be receiving is one that is tailor-made to them, right? Is one that is tailor-made to this new ideas that they're trying out. But on top of that, we tell you that whoever is going to be paying these companies the most amount of money, whoever is going to be providing these companies with the most amount of profit is going to be the one that controls essentially the kind of information that they propagate, right? And we tell you that that very problem exists within the status quo, which they're trying to solve, and they don't actually do that. On top of that, when it comes to the burdens of how we get culture, how we develop diversity, we have that within our status quo, and we have a greater platform for those, and those platforms are TikTok, they are Facebook, and you should side with opposition. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was the case from Nelson Mandela University on the opposition team. And to close off the debate, we now hear from the reply speaker on the proposing side from Rhodes University, James Okuku.
I think the first reason why side opposition loses this debate is that this debate ought to be comparative. So side opposition needed to explain to us, if we don't ban those search engines like Facebook, Twitter, and stuff like that, what benefit do they give us? At best, they give us mitigatory mechanisms, saying that we can tailor this to that. They don't even explain to us how you tailor those Facebook, that Twitter, that to the current media that we have. Two reasons why we win. I think first and foremost, we prove to you two essential harms in their world. We tell you that in a world where you don't ban these search engines, two problems happen. One, you lose the originality that comes from or originates from African countries. Why is this true? When a TikTok trend in the USA starts trending, it will trump a TikTok trend in an African country. The problem with this is that you make the Western media determine the narratives here. Their argument or their rebuttal is that, hey, even the one who comes up will rule the media then. Two responses why this is not true. I think one, to often gain hegemonic control, you often need a long period of time. But secondly, if all of you are SMEs at the same exact time, you are unlikely to have a hegemonic control. But secondly, because you are a national or a local country, governments can control you better. It means that they can often have mitigatory mechanisms based on what you put out. Is the media safe? That is much better. But it is tough for you to control a one Facebook whose headquarters is all the way in the USA because you don't have any direct incentive as to why they ought to follow you in those instances because they can make that money in other markets. Originality is important because we're in an African context and promoting African incentives is extremely important. I think the second thing we do here is that we show you why you stagnate away from local businesses. Why? Big conglomerates have money. They can afford to operate even at lower prices. Small countries, small SMEs, small local companies can't operate like that. We flip the argument and say, those are the harms. What are the benefits? We prove to you two benefits. We prove to you local development. Why? When you have these companies being banned and they're out of the market, you have more innovations from local individuals who come up with SMEs to take up the market. The argument is simple. Remove the big people, create market space, and allow these individuals come to gain market trust. We think that's far much fundamentally better because you have more local businesses developing. But secondly, and I think the most crucial argument is the neo-colonialistic sentiment that comes on their side. Understand, on our side, where you have local companies dominating the industry, they determine the narrative. We can bite the bullet and say it's okay. Even if it is our own people controlling the narrative, we're okay with that. The problem we have is the narrative being controlled by individuals who don't even understand the specific narratives in our country. We can create the jobs. It may be inconveniencing, but it is better to rely on our own indigenous people.
And thank you very much to the proposing team for their speeches. We're going to take a very short break. On the other side of this, our judge for this debate will tell us who the winner is. It's exactly a 30-second break that we'll take. We'll be right back.
SAfm 105.9 FM in Port Elizabeth.
This week, today, Fridays, 6 to 7 p.m.
Before we announce the winner, we ask you to have a listen at these WhatsApp voice notes that has come through on our WhatsApp line on 0614 104 107. And on the other side of that, in fact, we're going to go right into it. Our judge for the debate will tell us who the winner is, and she'll in a minute tell us why that person is the winner or how she viewed the debate. Our judge, a very neutral party to this debate, former debater alongside me at the University of the Witwatersrand, Yandisa Jaggers.
So the winner for this debate is proposition, and the reason why they do win the debate is, one, they did a very good job at fulfilling their burden and just giving us context and perhaps the need for getting rid of your big conglomerates and multinational companies and the difficulty in controlling them. The problem with opposition is that they didn't do a good enough job in comparing the current world with which we exist with the theoretical one we're talking about, and why it's necessarily better, even though we do get Western propaganda, even though we do get Westernization and Western countries controlling even our own narratives as Africans. So that's why proposition wins, but also they do a very good job of pointing out and describing how social media works in terms of who gets viewed, who gets airtime, who gets exposure, and a lot of the time that is Western media. And in opposition side, there isn't a counter as to how do we fix that? That, okay, then even if we have Facebook and we both concede that these are the problems, how do we fix then the problem without necessarily banning Facebook, banning Twitter and TikTok or whatever? So yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Congratulations to Rhodes University side proposition winning this debate. We look forward to bringing you the next edition. I think that feedback was very clear, and you can understand why Team Proposition won this debate. We're a little bit over time, and we slightly do apologize for the slight delay in that. Up next is the news at 7. Mark joins you on the other side of that. Cheers.
Independent and impartial. This is SAfm.